Good night, Bob.
Good night, Bob.
Hey there, welcome to ATL and 29, a podcast where we look at the NBA from the starting point of Atlanta. My name is Kevin Chenard. I'm here with Glenn Willis and Keandre Ashley of Hoop Intellect, recording on, I think it's a Wednesday night. I've lost track. No, it's a Thursday night, uh, sort of overlapping with the Celtics Pacers game. That's probably all but done at this point, but uh, ready to talk more draft coverage. I have the hiccups, so if you hear me violently shaking in the background, that's all that was. But we're excited to talk more draft like we've been doing all along. Hawks have the number one pick. They have a lot of options. I think they have the option of also playing things very close to the vest because they have the number one pick. They don't have to share intel. They don't have to do a lot. They can kind of just do what they want to do. And so it's a little bit of a guessing game for us. And so I'm excited to talk to Keandre about what he thinks might happen here.
Yeah, Keandre, before we jump in, if you want to, what was your path to this? 'Cause I love your channel on YouTube. I love the stuff you put out on Twitter or X, whatever we're calling it today. But just curious, what was your path to this point before we kind of start talking about actual draft prospects?
Yeah, so I mean, it's I guess to make a long story short, I've just always been a basketball guy. I played in high school, turned down the opportunity to play in college at more like D2 JUCO type of levels, but just went to kind of focus on sports media and kind of find a niche or a path in that respect, or just sports management or anything in that kind of realm. That's what I was focused on, and then from there, I just started the YouTube channel and wanted to figure out how I could kind of put my thoughts and whatever I felt like I had to offer to the basketball space in general out there. I wasn't like a very good editor at the time with like the video stuff, so I just kind of learned along the way and made like highlight videos to bring attention to the channel because that's what I wanted to like put a small basis of like eyes and audience there. And then I kind of turned some of the writing that I did in the draft space on, just independently on Medium during that time in college into the scatter reports in 2020. And, they kind of they slowly took off from there. And I kind of just jumped in, full speed into the scouting realm, talked to a lot of different people, had a lot of different experiences, been blessed to have opportunities to work with teams directly and talk to different people in the space in general. So from there, just been kind of grinding, trying to figure things out, and it's worked out to this point. Just hit 50,000 subscribers on the channel about a week or so ago. So yeah, it's kind of been a blur. Obviously some of that happening during the pandemic. The draft got extended all the way to like November or whatever. Things kind of run together in my mind a little bit, but it's been a fun process.
Yeah, I think what I appreciate is, I think people have different tastes for different guys. Like, I can't go read a 45-minute piece on one prospect. I can't do it. I mean, I love that level of depth in terms of thinking about it. My life, my work demand, all that sort of stuff. Your videos typically, right, 15 to 20 minutes, maybe even a little short, on the shorter side of that. You hit on
Mhm.
everything, and it's a really good kind of portion. I think for someone who wants to go, I'm on a break at work, or I have 20 minutes at home, before I go. And so I think your ability to kind of hit that level of here's really the big takeaways that I have to share with you and to kind of demonstrate that in video form and everything. So, and I also appreciate just that the commentary is super balanced and thoughtful, and not everyone is looking for the brand in the social media era and all that sort
Yeah.
of stuff. So just want to, big pat on the back there. So Hawks fans want to, I think Hawks fans feel like the conversation is over. It's SAR, right? And I'm hoping that we can have a conversation that lets us benefit from your expertise and your insight around and help us understand maybe there's a different way to think about this as a collective Hawks fan. I think if you were to kind of do a research on Twitter, like 98% of Hawks fans, it has to be SAR, it has to be SAR, it has to be SAR. There's a little interest in Klingon, but he's a pretty unique size and still guy in some ways. I think this is the Hawks fans' perspective. And the Hawks fans aren't talking about Ricochet at all. They're not talking about Matas at all. And there may be someone else you have in mind that is the EFL kind of is worthy of kind of throwing into the mix there too. So you want to just take a few minutes to just kind of share kind of the way you view the top of your board just on a vacuum, and then if you want to kind of share like how you view where the Hawks are right now, impacting the way you see that impacting whether the Hawks fans should be looking at that board or not. So you just kind of give us a walk through kind of how the top of your board looks and why.
Yeah, so I am also a SAR guy, just in terms of in a vacuum, the top talent in this draft. I think that's uh, been the case for me over the last several months after he kind of got going in the NBL. But from a Hawks perspective, I definitely think exploring all the options, especially in a draft like this where there isn't a marquee guy per se in terms of like someone who you know is going to be a franchise cornerstone or at least has the playmaking elements that a guy like Apollo Banchero or obviously Victor Wembanyama or even going back Anthony Edwards, Cade Cunningham, those type of guys that we've seen in the past garner that number one spot. He's not necessarily that guy, but I think that in this class you've got other guys like Ron Holland who I'm a little bit higher on than others. I think if that were to be the option, just based off of how the rest of the people in the draft space have kind of valued him, it would probably mean, trading back or exploring different options in that way. But I think what Holland brings to the table as obviously the Ignite had a down season this year, but somebody who's 6'7", is a high level slasher, operated well off the ball as well in terms of cutting, high level athlete, and a big time defensive playmaker, and just has the frame to add to that in a lot of different ways. I think he's definitely a guy that somebody in the Hawks position would explore for somebody who could make more plays in the future, in more of that wing archetype. Now he's going to take a little while in terms of building the shot and some of the decision making on the fly that he's going to need to improve upon. But I think he's a guy that, especially in this class, has more tools to explore his upside than maybe he's been placed or put in with the rest of the class, just at least by the consensus. I think another guy is obviously Zachary Rizachet, and there's been other reports around the Hawks potentially considering him and Sarr at the top as well. I've been a little bit more hesitant on him, kind of just up and down throughout the year because of who he was coming in. Now, just a little bit of background for people who may not know, last year, or at least in the previous years, he has been a highly regarded prospect, but he's had some inconsistencies, some tendencies to be a little bit hesitant, and some of those things still remain there, but had some struggles as a shooter as well. But being a fluid athlete on the wing and being able to do a number of things in guard has kind of gotten him a lot of appeal. But this year he started off shooting the ball extremely well, 45 to 50% in his first real big time professional play over there. And obviously got a lot of attention for that. Hit a big slump in the middle of the season, wasn't really affecting the games as well. He's bounced back a little bit more over the last month or so, I would say. But yeah, he's definitely a guy who fits the modern archetype of a wing who can get out there and shoot, moves well enough to be able to do a number of things in the future, like his stride length, and even though he doesn't have necessarily the handle or natural inclination to create a little bit more, I like the potential to do a little bit more of that stuff, at least in a complementary type of way. So kind of that 3-and-D mold obviously isn't necessarily the archetype that often goes that high in a class, but is somebody who could provide good value and you can build with. So I think, yeah, from a Hawks perspective, those guys, Sarr, Holland, Riza, even, somebody like, maybe not at one, but like Stephon Castle, I think is interesting from an upside perspective. Now, there's a lot of stuff that's kind of unknown that we wouldn't be privy to from just like a public information standpoint in terms of his creation, because he has done more of that in the past, but and was in like a very small role at UConn this year that obviously won the national championship in dominant fashion. But yeah, I think that they're going to do their due diligence, and with the guys like Trae Young and DeJounte Murray and Jalen Johnson, like you have a lot of opportunity to make moves and kind of go in a certain direction this summer and posture yourself or position yourself maybe a little bit further for next year that has some of those more marquee type of guys that we're used to seeing towards the top of the drafts in a Cooper Flag or some others. But yeah, I think that's kind of where I stand on things now.
Uh, the Hawks don't really have uh, a good depth of draft pick for the next few years because of the DeJounte Murray trade.
Hmm.
If you were to see them trading back, they're assuming they get to look at everybody and kind of test things out and get a lot of people in to work out. If they fall in love with somebody else in the top tier and want to move back, what's maybe the furthest that would they would move back in terms of, okay, if they moved further than that, they'd be dropping down a tier.
I would say probably five-ish, five-ish, somewhere in there. I think that just given the sort of a little bit wider of a tier at the top this year, I think 5 to 7-ish range. If you could find a partner, that would probably be somewhere in there. But usually it'd probably be a little bit higher. But somewhere in there is probably where I would say makes the most sense. And in terms of like what I said earlier, positioning themselves to possibly do more in the future, it'd be like those San Antonio trades we kind of see floating around, getting the picks back, or doing things like that.
So a guy, I want to ask you a philosophy question. A guy like Holland who will need reps to
Hmm.
improve his second, to become a secondary creator potentially, right? When you think about him playing on a team with a ball dominant point guard like Trey Young, like, do you see that as being a really limiting kind of scenario where it's going to be hard to get him those reps? I think back to the last 10 years, and I've seen guys that, and I'm not trying to pick on anyone, but like young guys who needed those reps that maybe they played with Zach Levine and couldn't get those
Hmm.
reps, right? And in a lot of cases, this guy's like Trey, plenty of people will say, You're silly to not have the ball in Trey's hands all the time." But I think everyone is at this point in time, there's a general consensus that you've got to have capable secondary creators. There's no doubt that Quinn sees that as being an absolute key to his offense. He talks about the zero point 0.5, all the time, catch the ball and, make a decision in half a second on shoot, I think the triple pass, whatever it is. Does that impact the way you see in an opportunity like that? Like if a guy like that lands with a team like the Hawks that has that, are you like, oh man, how is he ever going to get the chance to get there? What from a process standpoint, how do you look at situations like that?
Yeah, I think that every situation is a little bit different, and I do think having a guy like Trey Young can be both a positive and a negative in some ways. Obviously, the style that he's played most of his career could be a little bit more difficult for a guy like Holland to adjust to, especially given he isn't there right now as a spot up shooter, and kind of playing more directly off of attacking closeouts early could be a little bit tougher for him than, let's say, him going to even the team like Charlotte, where I mean LaMelo handles the ball a lot, but it's not going to be as in the same way as Trey Young, or going to a team like Washington where it's kind of wide open and he'll get those reps a little bit more cleanly. So I think having a guy like Trey Young could be positive in the sense that like his role is going to be a little bit more condensed early in a way that Trey Young is going to find him in open spots, and just playing off of that gravity of a star like that could be positive, but also doing some of the things might take a little bit longer if he's kind of positioned in a place, especially if they're like competitive, and like you still maybe you have DeJounte still, or whoever, who knows who else could be on the team. I think it could be a little bit tougher for him.
So if I'm trying to bring that back to you, the good is Trey simplifies
Yeah.
things for everybody, right?
Hmm.
The bad is sometimes simplifying means you're not getting as many diverse opportunities to see what the defense is doing, read it, and go. Like you're getting, I don't know, 8 of those a week instead of 30 of those a week, or whatever it might be, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what I would say it is.
Um, so we didn't mention Montas, you didn't mention Klingon. You want to talk a little bit so it sounds like maybe, I don't want to put words in, but like maybe they're not quite in that tier for you. I think Hawks fans are curious about both of those guys, so you might kind of
Mhm.
covering those two guys off in terms of how you see them.
Yeah, I think Klingon is definitely in that conversation, at least too. Modest, I'm a little bit more. kind of 50-50 with. I'll talk about him second. But yeah, Klingon, I think from just a sheer size standpoint, and his production on the defensive end over the last 2 years at UConn, leading one of the most dominant college teams we've seen in the last 20 years, is something that a lot of teams are going to be interested in. That alone, I think he has one of the clearest NBA roles out of all the people that have been mocked in the top 10. And I think there's real appeal in that. And if we look historically, he's posted numbers that were, on par with the guys like Chet Holmgren, Derek Lively, who we've seen have immediate success in the league. And other, big time rim protectors and Walker Kessler, those guys, we've seen in the college game recently. So I think that for that reason alone, he's got to have consideration in the top five. But the offense, him not having as many high minute reps, and we haven't seen him be play a full season playing 30 minutes, or the conditioning is a work in progress, and some of the foot issues he's had in the past at least give you pause. Obviously the medical teams on the staffs will be able to see that better than we can from our distance. But yeah, from that perspective, I think he's somebody who should definitely be in consideration. Number one is just a little rich for me, only because of the offense. Now, again, playing next to Trae Young, DeJounte, whoever else the playmaker might be over there, he's gonna have a clear role, but I don't know what his ceiling could ultimately be unless you really believe in his 3-point shot. But for Modest Buzelis, he's somebody who came into the year with high expectations, potential number one pick. Just dropped his scouting report too, so whatever I say here could also be a little bit better explained in what I put in that video, especially with the clips and everything. But he's somebody who came into the year as a build as like a point forward, somebody who's going to come in and create, do a little bit of everything. But that wasn't necessarily the case this year, and he just seemed a little less capable of taking on some of those responsibilities. Struggled as a shooter. He had more success in his senior year of high school, but with those struggles, it just made it a little bit tougher for him to find a niche offensively, at least in that creator way. But I did think he did a good job of filling in as a cutter and more of an off-ball threat, and I think that's what he's going to more naturally do in the NBA as a 6'10" sort of forward. Probably best suited as a four-man more than a natural three. And then on the defensive end, I was actually surprised by what he did in a lot of ways. I thought that he was going to struggle more, but he actually provided some great help side rim protection, held his own in space as much as he possibly could, got taken advantage of a little bit in terms of foot speed and just strength. But yeah, he's somebody who I see more of as like a complementary player, somebody who could come in and play off of your stars, and hopefully if the shot can be there, like I think it can, just mechanically and with some of his touch in short spaces, it should be able to translate further, but not necessarily somebody I would feel super confident in taking first. Now, if we start getting into 3, 4, 5, it makes it a little bit easier of a sell.
You mentioned a minute ago that maybe Klingon had the most obvious path to an NBA role, that what he's going to be. And I think kind of going along with that a little bit is that maybe he's got the shortest on ramp in terms of how many years or how much time it would take him to get to that role. So I want to ask you two questions. Who, as you look at this top tier of players, which players have sort of the longer on ramps and which ones have the shorter on ramps to a clear NBA role? And then second, if the Hawks plan out a future that involves Trae Young, which of these players do you think gets unlocked best by Trae playing with them?
Yeah, so I would say in terms of your first question, longest would probably be, or some of the longest. I'll extend that down to like top 10ish, just in terms so we can cover most of the people in that range. But I would say Ron Holland is closer to the top in that respect, just given the shooting and the stuff we touched on. Another guy would probably be Modest Buzelis, and then Stephon Castle, at least offensively, just because there's questions there. Now he could take on a little bit more duties point guard wise and kind of outperform some of his expectations, but I think it could still take a minute, just given some of his hesitancy offensively. But those would be the three that would take probably the longest. And then Klingon, like we had mentioned, I feel like he's got the clearest path to, you know what he's going to do. So if he's in the situation to get those minutes and he's well conditioned enough, I think that there's no reason that he can't do it. And then I would say probably Reed Shepard, or he's probably one of the guys that would have the ability to impact the game sooner. Now, situation wise, depending on who he's with in the backcourt, it could make things a little bit more difficult for him, but I think that he has the tools to do that. And then like a guy like a Dalton Connect, who we've seen in different, some people might have him as high as 5, some people might have him as low as 14, but that's another guy who I think might not have the highest ceiling or the biggest upside, but has a clear role that he could play in the league.
Where are you on Topic?
Yeah, he's one of the more interesting guys to me because like
I
I
think I said it
see
wrong. It's Topic, isn't it?
I've been trying to figure that out all year.
Thank
I've said it
you.
both ways because like you think Jokic, Topic, that's what I was thinking, but then I would hear the commentators, they say it more like Topic, but I couldn't figure out if that was their accent or what it was. But yeah, yeah, he's somebody who I think ceiling wise, you look at a big guard, 6'6", able to make plays in the ways that he can, and it's obvious. Like that's a type of guy that would have appeal in a lot of different ways now, but his inability to play off the ball, or at least struggles to play off the ball at this point, the shot and the questions in the shot, and being able to both shoot in catch and shoot situations, and also punish teams and pick and roll and get to an in between game. He doesn't really have much of that. It becomes pretty much get downhill and get to your angle and get to a spot at the rim, or kick out, and that's all he's really done. And especially when he's faced more physical defenders, it gets a little bit tougher for him to generate things. So, and then obviously you have the defensive end of the floor where he hasn't at least been the greatest to this point, and he's missed most of the last 4 months or so with an injury, where we were about to see him take a little bit of a jump in competition level. So there's a lot of questions with him. I think that if I'm a team, I'm still exploring the possibility, just because some of the things that he showed early on aren't like anybody else really in the class, besides maybe if you want to say Isaiah Collier, who has his own issues in some other ways, just from like a playmaking or being able to get in the paint perspective. But yeah, I think that he's somebody who I would value just a little bit lower for some of those concerns.
And how about Dillingham? I know when I seen it, I was like, man, it looks like he can do everything you want a point guard to do on offense in the NBA level,
Yeah.
but on defense, it's like, oh my goodness, like how are we going to work with this? So but that's my simple 8 seconds. Like, give us the depth that you have that I don't.
Yeah, I think that's about as simple as you could explain it. I think he's probably the most dynamic offensive talent in this class. Obviously, for the Hawks, having a Trey Young or even a DeJounte, and kind of maybe trying to go away from the small guard if you're going away from Trey Young, he probably wouldn't be the greatest option. But just from a general synopsis standpoint, one of the most creative guys, super shifty in his handle, able to get to a lot of different spots on the floor, plays off ball about as well as anybody in the class, and I think that's one of his more underrated elements of his game. But as you said, he measured in at about 6'1" at the combine and 164, I believe, and defensively the effort was just not there in a way that you would want to see from a guy that size, because you're already a liability, but if you're not finishing pick and rolls, defending from behind, peeling, doing things of that nature, it becomes bad fast. And it did for Kentucky, and just their team as a whole, they did not bring it on that end, and he was a big part of that. So I think that's pretty much one of the whatever he or who he is as a player. I guess, I think he's a little bit more capable as a playmaker. He didn't get a ton of opportunities to run pick and rolls and just like run their offense in a way that I think he will at the next level. But yeah, I think he has really high upside. It's just the defense might hold him back and turn him into more of a six man or just a scoring punch off the bench.
Thank you. Um, so you're a SAR guy, and I think Hawks fans are enjoy this podcast. Maybe just 5% more of that. So maybe a few like Hawks specific questions. So, when I'm trying to envision, first of all, let's hit the position thing because that's a conversation that will not end. Um, Power forward, center combo. What's your kind of view on what he is as he enters the league and what he might become in, say, the first couple of years of his time in the league?
Yeah, so I think that eventually he's gonna be a five. I think that that's where he's gonna fit in best. And I think that's where he would find the most value in terms of versatility, no matter what happens with his shot. But early on, if he isn't able to, hang physically with certain guys and gets moved around in certain ways, then he might have to play the four, and that puts a little bit more onus on, his shot being there, or at least in some capacity. I think if you have, there's other solutions and ways to get around that depending on the lineups that you're playing with. Putting a guy in the dunker, even putting him in the corner, and defense is sinking in, and him being able to play out of that dunker spot and cutting and moving and just using him as a screener could open things up. But yeah, I think that's the general synopsis for him. Like positionally, he's gonna have to get stronger and make things a lot easier in whatever he does. But yeah, I think he's a five full time, and I wouldn't mind seeing him start there, in his career, and just kind of seeing where it goes and moving on from there. But that would be probably, and I've kind of gone back and forth on that, but that's the position I've kind of landed on over the last few weeks and months.
Kind of going
I
along with
think it's
that. Like,
okay. Yeah.
oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Kevin. No, go
Um,
ahead, Kevin.
what if he's sort of a if we're sort of iffy on him being a 4 or 5 or somewhere in between, what what is the team that you want to put around him to in order for him to sort of optimize his development? Like, what do you want out of your other big? What kind of role do you want him to have on offense? Like, what are the things that the Hawks need to do in the first year plus to kind of get him to where, okay, we can take advantage of the things that he's already good at, but also get him some time to explore what he needs to improve at?
Yeah, so I think the first thing would just be if he is playing the five early, having him be able to have help on the glass, guys who can maybe cross match at times. If that means sacrificing a little bit of spacing early on and putting Okongwu in there or whoever else is in there, then I think that's something that is a plausible solution to that. If you are playing him more at the four, depending on where his shot is at, having somebody else like or I guess, playing him at the five and having somebody like Jalen Johnson, who is versatile, has worked on the shot and gotten it to a certain level where he can, bring or attract the defense away. I think that could be one of the perfect type of fits that you would want around a guy like him. So those are the two main things. But as long as you have some sort of context where you can minimize his strength deficiencies or abilities to finish possessions in certain aspects, then I think that he'll be fine, especially as time goes on.
The way opposing defenses often defend trade, doubling, trapping, hard hedging, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, what you think of his performance so far in short roll. Like, do you think the passing is going to come? Do you think, and of course, we know in the NBA level, it's not just the passing. It's sometimes attack the rim, sometimes attack a smaller defender in the paint that's was low man or whatever it is. Processing wise and kind of raw skill, what's your expectation for how that might come along for him?
Yeah, so I was actually really impressed with that aspect of his game. I thought it was there in a way that I wasn't expecting. just in terms of being able to make certain passes and make quick reads on the fly off of, some of those slip opportunities when they were blitzing that ball handler, and it turns into an advantage situation. So I think that he's probably going to have more of an issue with being able to finish more away from the bucket in terms of getting a push shot or getting a pull up that's really consistent in the first couple years of his career. But I think from a standpoint of, you got a guy like Trey who attracts that gravity, I think that he's somebody that can make plays to the corner, being able to hit whoever it might be in the dunk spot or a cutter, and also put the ball on the floor, take two dribbles, and get to the rim with his strides and athleticism. That's stuff that I think that he can do and would really benefit from somebody like Trey Young. I think that's where he kind of could hit his ceiling as an offensive player a little bit quicker. But obviously for young bigs, it's always a work in progress. I just think that part of his game is going to be there, and I wouldn't really have too many questions about it.
As a screener, one thing Hawks are kind of scrutinizing,
Yeah.
and this would be interesting to get your aspect is, I mean, with his speed and athleticism, kind of athlete he is, the slipping, all of that kind of stuff, short roll, but he doesn't always generate the most on a traditional screen pick and roll. Doesn't always generate the most contact. It seems like the timing with his guard is not always kind of right there, and so it seems like an area of his game that to really work with a guy like Trey would need a lot of improvement. What's your view there?
Yeah, that's the part of his game that I think, in terms of like role man responsibilities, that's what is going to take the most work for him. I'm not sure how long that'll take. We saw a guy like Derek Lively, who was a really bad screener at Duke, come in this year over the course of the season, get better. We've seen some real screening craft from him, flipping screens and being a more effective guy to open up lanes for Luka and Kyrie this year. So I think it is possible for him to make those strides early on, especially with a guy like Trey Young, who's, you're going to have the reps, like you're going to have the opportunity to succeed or fail early on. But that is something with his frame and just being able to stand in there and open up that space. That's going to be something that he'll have to work on in his career early on.
All of that considered, is the shot the big swing skill for him?
For sure. I think that's the biggest thing. That's gonna dictate his offensive upside quite a bit, because obviously we just go back to that pick and roll. If he's a pick and pop threat in a big way, that opens up a lot of more opportunities as well, in terms of how a defense is gonna play those situations, and even just being able to put him in the corner. We see the value of guys who play the five, even a Miles Turner, and how he changed the Celtics defense in game two, and the way that they approached it. The value of those guys is always high, especially when you can protect the rim on the other end. So for him, I think he's capable of making those shots at a decent clip and being able to space the floor. But I think it could take some time. We didn't get to see a huge sample of it this year. Towards the end of the season, it seemed like they kind of wanted him to go away from it a little bit more. And his minutes were so a little up and down, which wasn't his fault. I think the coaches, it was a competitive team, so it made sense not to play the young guy. But at the same time, he could have helped them a little bit more than I think they leaned into. But yeah, we didn't get to see a ton of it, so I think it's just going to be a wait and see thing. I think that he's capable though.
I think maybe the last thing here is the Hawks fans are trying to figure out, because of spacing, is can he play with Kongwu and Jalen, right?
Mhm.
Kongwu has been developed nicely as a corner shooter, but the volume's still pretty small. Right? I think he
Yeah.
shot probably like 38% from the corner last year. I think he made 1 3 above the break all of last year. So, maybe that'll, I mean, if Kongwu, I always like to say, if Kongwu were here, he'd be like, it's coming, Glenn. Like, I'm working on it. But is that workable at all, to you? Or,
I would try it. If Trey and you got like a guy like Bogey back there in the backcourt, I think you could at least see what it looks like, and that's what I would do. Because it's just going to be dependent on where Okongwu goes as a shooter and where Sarr is. Obviously, I think you might have a little bit more difficulty in just like matching up defensively, depending on who it is, with Jalen sticking and having to navigate a ton of screens out there on the perimeter, or even Sarr, depending on who they're playing. But from like a standpoint of just being able to put size out there next to a creator in Trey or whoever else is back there, I think that it's something that I would do and at least see. I don't know if the results would be there the cleanest early on, but like if you could keep that together and build chemistry, I think it could work.
Oh, appreciate you, Keandre. Wonderful to hear from you, all the insight. We have a tradition here you're not going to be familiar with where we close our episode by saying good night, Bob.
Good night, Bob.
Good night, Bob.